What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and we have some more Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers, and I'm pretty excited about them. So today what I did was I grabbed a handful of cards that have been spoiled in the last 2 days or so, and I want to talk about them because I find these particular cards interesting in one way or another. Now, I'm going to be talking about a lot of the splashy cards up front, and we're going to talk about a couple of more, like, bread and butter, like common uncommon utility players later in the video. So if that's of any interest, stick around for that. But we're starting with some pretty intense hotness right at the top, and I would be remiss if I didn't start off with Tyrranax Rex, because there's a freaking plague dinosaur in this set, and that is rad. All right, so it's an 8/8 for 4 green, green, green. This spell can't be countered with Trample, Ward 4, Haste, and Toxic 4. So this thing is fascinating. If you are curious, would a card like Carnage Tyrant, which is like designed to really hate on like traditional blue-based control decks, would a card like that function well in the today's standard? Well, we're gonna find out, because Tyrranax Rex is very similar to Carney T, in that it has Ward 4, so it's difficult to target. Not impossible, but difficult. And then it also is just a big old trampler. In this case, an 8/8, whereas Carnage Tyrant, if I'm not mistaken, was a 6/6, and that was big enough to cause a lot of, plenty of frustration in its day. But being an 8/8 is fantastic. Also, Toxic 4 here is a big deal. Toxic, if you're not familiar with the keyword, the way that Toxic is worded is that whenever Tyrranax Rex deals any combat damage to a player, they get 4 poison counters. So if you strike them with Tyrranax Rex, they get 4 poison counters. If they've had poison counters added to them in the past, they have to be wary of that. And it presents a really interesting scenario. If your opponent has, I don't know, 17 life and isn't really that worried about taking a hit for 8, like, they would be, I don't know, most of the time it wouldn't be unheard of or crazy to just let the creature through and hit you for a turn. Maybe you got removal next turn or whatever the case may be. So, like, sure, let them smack me. Or maybe you have the win, on the crackback or whatever. Like, yeah, let the big dino hit me one turn, it'll be fine. However, if you've been taking poison damage throughout the course of the game, that Toxic 4 is a big frickin' deal. Being able to stamp 4 poison counters on somebody in one go is a big deal. And based on the costing that I have seen for Toxic in All Will Be One so far, it looks like getting a large number of poison counters in one go onto a player is going to be very, very difficult. That said, stacking up triggers and proliferates on top of each other over and over and over again to add up to 10 poison counters, that might be pretty darn easy. But Toxic 4 seems really big. Like, that's a lot. The other cool thing about this, if they put 7 toughness in the way of Tyrranax Rex, only 1 damage tramples through, but they still get the poison counters. So Tyrranax Rex attacks the player on 2 different axes. You're adding the poison counters while also dealing, potentially like 8 damage is a lot. Now, it is clever that it is Toxic 4, not Toxic 5. So it is impossible to get a 2-shot with this. You can't just like hit once, or give this thing double strike somehow and like just call it a game. Like, you can't do that. You have to add something else to the mix, some kind of proliferates or, 3 attacks with this thing or some other, toxic creatures. All in all, though, I think this card is very, very strong. So what I said previously with Nissa, the Awakened Animist, kind of holds true with Tyrranax Rex. I believe the card is excellent, but it's an expensive green card. If there is a deck that can support expensive green cards, this thing's a bomb and a half. And that deck may not even necessarily run it in the main decks, but this could be fantastic sideboard tech against blue decks, like against the mono blue deck that's running around right now, or against like Grixis or Esper control decks or mid-range decks. Those decks are all running counter spells. So Tyrranax Rex just being able to say, no, don't counter me, bro, is amazing. And then the Ward 4 makes it really difficult to hit. That said, Ward and Hexproof are nowhere near as good as they used to be right now. Like, it's not even close. So be aware of that. We have Sheoldred's Edict coming in Phyrexia All Will Be One. at a time when Liliana of the Veil and Invoke Despair are incredibly powerful, super common pieces of removal running around right now. And those say that, you know, target player sacrifices a thing. Well, you're not targeting Tyrranax Rex, so that ward 4 is irrelevant in that case. So you'd have to have a lot of other things running around that you could sacrifice, because you're going to see those pieces of removal. In any event, I think this card's sweet. Friggin' Plague Dino. Let's go. I'm in. All right, next up, we have Sword of Forge and Frontier. Now, this is part of a cycle. This is part of a long-standing cycle that was introduced when we first visited Mirrodin back in, like, what, 2003, 2004, whenever that was, with Sword of Fire and Ice and Sword of Light and Shadow. And the Sword cycle, which, you know, cycle it is, are all 3-mana equipments that give a creature +2/+2 protection from 2 colors, and then do something wild that is, like, within those colors, you know, identity mechanically when that creature strikes a player. And they cost 3 to play, equip for 2. You get a ton of value on these cards, and the swords are all colorless. So just by nature of the way these swords work, they are all phenomenal. Like, phenomenal. Like, if you are doing any kind of, like, equipment-based commander anything, you want to include as many of these as you can get. They're some of the cheapest equipments you can get. They all have phenomenal, you know, attack, you know, or damage deal triggers. And on top of that, the protection makes it easier for your creatures to get through, because in the case of Sword of Forge and Frontier, it gives protection from red and green. Red and green creatures can't block this. Also, I find it really funny. We're at a time where green is, like, the worst it's ever been in Standard, and this gives protection from green. So, dope. Way to kick them while they're down, Wizards. But in any event, what does Sword of Forge and Frontier do? I'm getting ahead of myself. Whenever equipped creature, so +2/+2, pro red and green. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. You may play an additional land this turn. This is very unassuming. It doesn't look like it's amazing. However, it is giving you access to 2 additional cards every single turn, and you can hit multiple land drops in a turn as well with this. So if you're drawing additional lands off the top of your library, you just get them for free. Like, you're almost freely ramping off your opponent. Note, you only get the cards this turn. So what I would highly recommend in most situations, once the sword is online and doing its thing, I would recommend attacking first, striking the opponent, hopefully, seeing those cards before you've played a land or cast any spells for a turn. That way your mana's open, because if you get something better... Now, of course, obviously, if you're using hasty creatures or whatever the case may be, that's not always the best option. But with these impulsive draws, you need to be aware. You know, this is limited time only. But all in all, I think this sword is an excellent addition to the pantheon that is the Mythic Sword cycle, and I think the card is actually really strong. I think it reads kind of meh. It doesn't look as flashy or quite as sexy as some of the other swords out there, but I think this card is, like, quietly really good. So, like, card advantage on equipment is great. Like, think about Boros equipment decks. Card advantage is something that is difficult to make work in those decks, you know, traditionally anyway. I know there are some recent cards that have kind of flipped the script on that a little, but this is another way to do that. I like it. I like it a lot, actually. All right, next up, Capricious Hellraiser. This is a Phyrexian dragon, 4/4 for 3 red. This spell costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. Flying, when Capricious Hellraiser enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This card is interesting. This is the kind of card that can set up, like, a legit not messing around turn 3 Portal to Phyrexia. Now, being able to set something like that up is difficult because you need to fill your graveyard with 9 things. That's not super easy to do by turn 3. You know, by turn 4 or 5, sure, but by turn 3, I mean, you really need access to things like Faithless Looting to really make that possible. Or even something, come to think of it, a card like Valakut Awakening that actually rotated out of standard last September, allows you to discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards. Things like that could be, you know, really where you need to be with this, because you got to fill the yard with a lot of stuff. And notably, if your graveyard is full of creatures, you're going to be far less likely to get value off the Hellraiser's ability, because you have at least 9 cards in your graveyard. You exile 3 of them at random. So assuming you only have 1 copy of Portal to Phyrexia or whatever the big bomb is you're trying to hit there, older formats, you got things like Omniscience, you got one with the multiverse, like there's some big crazy non-creature bombs you could be trying to get with this. So assume you have 1 of those in your graveyard along with some lands, maybe a creature or 2, and some other stuff like some utility spells. You have a 1 in 3 chance effectively of catching the card you want, your Portal to Phyrexia, with the Hellraiser's exile. If you do, you get to rip it for free. Dope, you did the thing, that's awesome. But if you didn't and you grabbed like 2 lands and a creature, well, you just exiled a third of your library for no reason. You get 0 value. Note, this is also only an ETB trigger. It doesn't also trigger when you attack or anything crazy like that. So it just, that's it. You either, like, you get it or you don't. And it's one of those where I feel like this is going to be, this looks to me like a Jank Brewer trap. I'm going to fall into it, but I think a lot of people who fancy themselves, you know, deck builders and aspire to be like fun, off the wall, avant-garde deck builders, of which I'm definitely a part. So anybody out there who feels that way, you rock. I appreciate you. A lot of people are going to try to find ways to break this. They're going to try to find ways to like lightning fill their graveyard as fast as humanly possible. New Jace is good for that. And then try to find ways to get good value. Actually, come to think of it, now that I say it out loud, I'm realizing Planeswalkers are probably a really good way to get consistent value off of this. Because if you're using Jace to just blow, like, just turn your library into your graveyard, because the downtick on Jace, the new completed Jace, is really good for filling your yard super fast. If you fill your yard super fast and you have like 3 or 4 planeswalkers in a library, in a graveyard of 9, 10 things, well, the chances of you hitting one of them is pretty good, and walkers in general are worth it. So I guess that's what it comes down to. If you want to build a deck around Capricious Hellraiser, if you want to build this dragon into a deck, have a lot of hits. If you put Hellraiser and just 1,000 ways to fill your graveyard super fast, and you play and you hope that you're gonna hit, you know, a portal on turn 3 every game, it is going to be shockingly inconsistent. And if that's the only way you're able to get value off of this ETB trigger, you are going to be sorely disappointed the majority of your games. In proper jank fashion, when it pops that one time, it's going to be freaking awesome, but your win rate's going to be really bad. So make sure you've got a lot of successful hits. Something like Fable the Mirror Breaker, if you hit that off this, you know, 3 mana 4/4 flying dragon, and you just get a free Fable the Mirror Breaker to recycle out of your graveyard, cool. Like, there's 0 wrong with that. That's actually a lot of just good generic value. So neat. But make sure you have a lot of things like that. You make sure that your 3 drops, your 4 drops, your mid-range threats are enchantments and planeswalkers and artifacts that aren't additionally creatures, so this thing can take advantage. So I think there are a ton of decks where this doesn't fit. And to be honest, I don't see this being a competitive card, but I could eat my words on this. Actually, you know what? This has given me the Demi-Lich vibes. So in AFR, there was the blue Demi-Lich that when it was spoiled, everybody was like, holy cow, this is going to be Delver's best friend. This thing's going to be absolutely everywhere. It came and went. It was in standard for like a year and a half. I never saw it. Like, no, I take that back. I think I saw it once, but it was memorable because so few people ever played it, and we thought it was amazing. This reminds me a lot of that. It's going to be like hyper specific to the deck that it can fit in, and it's going to be inconsistent value. Anyway, next up, we have Atraxa, Grand Unifier. So Atraxa is a Phyrexian angel for 3 green, white, blue, black. Yes, 4 colors, because Atraxa was originally introduced as the face card for a 4-color commander deck, and the character just kind of took off. The card was busted as in every deck that Atraxa has been in Commander has always been like they have a reputation. But the card itself, 4 colors, everything but red, and a total mana value, total mana cost of 7, 3 of which is generic. For a 7/7, Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. When Atraxa Grand Unifier enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So she's a big old beatstick, 7/7, keyword soup for 7, and she refills your hand. She reminds me a lot of like Niv Mizzet Reborn. The card is good. So, like, she's just generically good. If you can cast this card, you're going to get a lot of good value. And if you have a variety of card types in your deck, you're going to be drawing 2, 3 cards off of her pretty much every single time she hits the battlefield. Dope. And on top of that, you get really good selection. So, nice. Like, it's just a very powerful card. Generically a good card. If you're running 4 colors and you can make this card work, cool. Now, the reason that this card is making some mad waves on social media has nothing to do with the mechanics of the actual card. There is a reminder text on this card that spoiled some new information for us. It says, artifact, battle, creature, enchantment, instant, land, planeswalker, and sorcery are card types. Note, they didn't list tribal, which is in fact a card type that was introduced in Lorwyn. I'm not sure why that wasn't, listed as well, but they chose not to. I believe Atraxa would still see tribal as its own card type, but in any event, battle. What is a battle? I don't know. I don't know. And you don't know. And only the folks within Wizards R&D, only the folks actually at the mothership who's actually working on this stuff. They're the only ones who know. Battle is a new card type. And additionally, it doesn't appear to be a subtype. So we have things like, Locust or Sphere, which are subtypes of lands, or Gates, which are subtypes of lands, or Sagas that are subtypes of enchantments. So, you might think, oh, wait, they introduced all these new types recently. Things like Sagas are relatively young as far as Magic is concerned. But no, it's a subtype of enchantment. Battle is apparently its own thing. Like, it is its own standalone type. And so we can theorize about what that is. We can, make a bunch of predictions as to what that means. The general prevailing wisdom is, at this point, we have basically seen all of the rares from Phyrexia All Will Be One, as well as a number of the other cards at this point. At no point has any battle been spoiled. We would assume that there would be a rare battle if there were battles in this set. So apparently there are no battles, or, there seems to be. The evidence would suggest there are no battles in Phyrexia All Will Be One. And battles will be introduced in March of the Machine, which is the next standard set. I'm very interested to see what that means. Now, this also reminds me of a situation in which, prior to Ikoria coming out, one of the unsets, I believe it was Unstable, came out, and with it came a card called Surgeon Commander, and it had a bunch of text on it that, it had a triggered ability that whenever, basically a creature was modified, whenever, it got equipped, or an aura or a counter was placed on it, it did a thing. It also said whenever the creature mutates, and that was the first instance of the word mutate on a Magic card, and it was prior to Ikoria releasing. So that kind of hinted, by the way, there's this thing called mutate coming, and we all theorize about what that is. This is reminding me very much of that, because we have a situation now where Atraxa is letting us know battles are a thing, but I was like, wait, battles aren't a thing yet. Yeah, but they will be, and they are. Don't worry about it. They just are. So, I don't know. We'll see. I'm very intrigued. I'm wondering how they're going to be mechanically different from everything we currently have. Because to be honest, I don't know what play space. I'm confused as to what we can add, because I feel like if you need to be casting something that is temporary, You know, you have sorceries and instants. If you need something that sticks on the board, already we have enchantments and artifacts. And to be honest, like, if people wanted to nitpick the game and say that that was already overly complicated, that's fair. You know, enchantments and artifacts serve very similar purposes. It's just, obviously, there is a mechanical difference because it's been baked into the game over time. But all the same, I'm very interested to see how battle works. I'm wondering if they're doing something with maybe like a plane chase style effect where it like affects the entire battlefield. But in that case, that'd just be an enchant world. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, next up, we have the Filigree Sylex. This is the MacGuffin that Jace and team were taking to the Seed Core to attempt to blow up the World Tree or the Realm Breaker before it, well, broke all the realms. We all know how that turned out. If you don't know how that turned out, I highly recommend taking a read on the Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One story articles. They're actually really good. Like, I kind of come and go on story articles. Like, I hit them some sets and not others. This one, I was like riveted. I couldn't turn away. They're great. Anyway, Filigree Sylex, legendary artifact for 2. Tap, put an oil counter on the Filigree Sylex. Tap, sacrifice the Filigree Sylex, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of oil counters on the Filigree Sylex. Tap, remove 10 oil counters from among permanents you control, and sacrifice the Filigree Sylex. It deals 10 damage to any target. So 10 damage on a stick if you can get to the 10 oil counters is kind of neat. And then also being able to put the oil counters on the Sylex itself and then basically blow up based on that. So at this point, we have 3 Sylexes that will be in standard. We have Karn Sylex, Urza Sylex, and the Filigree Sylex. All of them are some flavor of like a Nevenriel's disc on board wipe. Like they all are. They do different, they do it differently, but at the end, to be honest, I think the Filigree Sylex is probably the goofiest of them. Like it's probably the least useful. The design isn't bad, and I would only consider running this in a situation where I have proliferate. If I'm leveraging proliferation somewhat regularly, then being able to drop this on 2, tap, put a counter on it, and then just to have it on board and manipulate the number of counters on it based on what my opponents are doing, and being able to like proliferate it up, or simply just tap it each turn and just buff it up, and just make it a little bit bigger, and get ready to blow up their 6-drop when it comes. I don't know. It's interesting because it is something that your opponent has to deal with. It is kind of appropriately, kind of a ticking time bomb because, Sylex. I also love how in Magic, the Sylex is like one of the ultimate weapons. It's a bowl. Like, it's just so funny. Like the big like bomb, like the nuke, it looks like a punch bowl. I love that. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's amazing. Like unironically, and it always has. Like for like 30 years of Magic storytelling, the big badass weapon has been just a big punch bowl. It makes me so happy. Anyway, so the Filigree Sylex is cool. It's a neat design. The fact that it only costs 2 to put down is awesome. So it's cheap. You can get it moving. And then it also has that remove 10 oil counter modes. So if you're doing other stuff with oil counters, this could be your finisher. Like you could just straight up nuke your opponent in the face for 10. And on top of that, I think a lot of people will not see that coming. Very similar to the activation on Bolas's Citadel. Like it's easy to forget that's there, where they can just like sacrifice 10 things and just blast you. This feels very similar to that. Also note, this costs no mana beyond the 2 mana initial investment. Okay, actually the more I look at it, the more I like it. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like the card's not bad. That said, you also need to note the second ability, sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of counters on it. It's equal, not equal to or less than. So if you have 3 oil counters on this, you're only gonna blow up 3 drops, period. If your opponent has a Graveyard Trespasser and a Liliana the Veil they're working on, well, that's great. But if they don't, and there's a 2-drop that's really causing some grief that you want to get rid of, too bad, sorry. Unless you can somehow remove an oil counter from it, but it doesn't do that naturally. I don't know, cool design, I like it. Although, actually, flavor-wise, the Sylex is the weapon that the good guys took to try to beat Phyrexia. I'm a little curious why it leverages oil counters, because at no point in the story aside from arguably the very end, actually what's pictured here, where a partially completed Jace is touching it, aside from that, as far as I know, the Sylex never came in contact with any oil. So it being mechanically tied to oil counters seems like a little bit of a flavor fail, but that's fine. It's still a cool card. It still works well. And oil counters are a thing in the set, so mechanically keeping them all tied together, I can see why they did it, but I don't know. Anyway, next up. Here we go. So this is an uncommon. This is a seemingly unassuming uncommon until you really think about how it works. And then it's a little scary. So Noxious Assault. This is a sorcery for 3 green. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature blocks this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. So I do not believe this will be playable in standard. Overrun style effects are usually not worth the card in your deck in most situations, in a lot of, well, recent standards anyway. Because if it's about 5 mana to buff the whole squad is great if you have a whole squad. But right now, we're in mid-range grindfest where having multiple creatures survive for multiple turns is a really big ask. Because the decks that aren't running 20 1-for-1 point-and-click removal spells in addition to their Reckoner, Bankbusters, and Invoke Despairs to refill are running massive board wipes in Farewell and Depopulate. So the chances of having a good size army on board by turn 5 or 6 to be able to rip this and swing in for the win, pretty low. On top of that, in this case, we want to be dealing with poison counters because that poison counter, you know, that poison counter clause is really, really powerful if your opponent has already been poisoned. And if the creatures you're swinging with are all toxic, they're straight up damned if they do, damned if they don't. If you let it through, you're going to get poison counters. If you block them, you're also going to get poison counters. So in any event, I don't expect this to see any meaningful play in standard. I would be shocked if it does. That said, a good finisher in like a green-black poison counter toxic deck, this could be a really powerful finisher. Like, I like the idea and I like the card design. That said, in Commander, if you are running a deck that can take advantage of this, your opponents are going to hate you. Because this is almost a second copy of Triumph of the Hordes. Like, it's not quite, it's toned down dramatically from Triumph of the Hordes, to be fair. But it's one of those things, if you hit, like, Triumph of the Hordes and this, all of a sudden, all your creatures have Infect, and your opponent gets poison counters if they block, and they're massive. So it's like, it just puts your opponent in this bind where it doesn't really matter what they do, they're just screwed. I don't know, it's interesting, but it's a feels bad. Like, this is, on certain board states, this is a situation where your opponent in one moment goes from having a good sequence of blocks to be able to survive and possibly turn the corner and take you out the next turn, to just being dead on the spot no matter what they do. And that's the thing. This, if you have an edge and you have a good board state and your opponent has some poison already, this is probably just going to end the game on the spot, and it's going to feel really, really bad when it does. That said, good overrun effects are good overrun effects. Crater of Behemoth, original overrun, well, Triumph of the Hordes. These are cards that get play, you know, and are just strong in certain decks. So I have a feeling that there are going to be Commander decks that want to take advantage of this. Commander decks that people aren't going to be too happy about. They will not be too happy to play against. But yeah, in standard, there's probably 1 or 2 decks that I'll end up putting it in as like a 1 or 2 of like top ender and try it out. We'll see. Maybe it might be able to deliver the finishing blow. All right, next up we have Vanish into Eternity. This is a common instant for 2 and a white. This spell costs 3 more to cast if it targets a creature. Exile target non-land permanent. So in mono white, exile target non-land permanent for 3 is pretty great. If it targets a creature, it's 6. So obviously if you're hitting a creature with this, it feels pretty bad. But if you're hitting a non-creature permanent, like, well, a Reckoner Bankbuster, Fable the Mirror Breaker, pre-flip, Wedding Announcement, any of those, this feels great. And if your opponent has like something like an Arcane Bombardment or, you know, or Rabble Rousing, like some of the big like bombs or Portal of Phyrexia, being able to blow this up at instant speed for 3 is amazing. And if it's late in the game and you've got plenty of lands and you just need to get rid of Sheoldred, this can do the job, but it's expensive. I think the card's good. Like, it's not amazing. This isn't like, well, it's not gonna blow your mind, but you know, it's fine. And there are going to be some decks that want it probably as sideboard tech, as kind of like a super disenchant. It's not bad. And also exiles. The fact that it doesn't destroy is huge. So it doesn't care about shield counters, doesn't care about any of that jazz. This can also ice planeswalkers for 3, which I suppose given the art is kind of appropriate. If you're not familiar, this is depicting one of the climactic moments in the story. And that is actually Elspeth holding on to the Sylex as it is seemingly starting to detonate. So yeah, that happened. That said, she did planeswalk right after that happened. So good money's on Elspeth still alive somewhere. But who knows where and who knows what blew up in the process. We have no idea. But we'll find out, I have no doubt. So amazing story beat, beautiful piece of artwork, and it is on an okay common, I guess. So that's kind of a bummer. Like, for a story beat this big, it could have been on a better card. There was a lot of speculation about this being a reprint of Path to Exile, which would have been flavorfully very appropriate, but they chose not to give us Path to Exile. We already have Lay Down Arms, so we like, I don't know that white needs Path in Standard, but all the same. Again, cool artwork, cool situation, and the card's perfectly fine. This is going to be a really good... Actually, to be honest, I think this is good for Commander. This is great for Commander, actually. I have learned to absolutely adore cards like Vindicate, Utter End, Binding the Old Gods that say destroy or exile target non-land permanent. That is excellent in games of Commander because of the sheer flexibility. You do not know what you're going to be playing against. You do not know what you're going to be going up against consistently day in and day out. And having the flexibility to just blow up a thing is really nice because chances are your opponents are going to have some kind of combo piece, and this deals with it. Also, flavor win here. This can... So I was just thinking about good Commander combos, and the Heliod Walking Ballista combo came to mind. If you don't have the Devotion, Heliod's not a creature, and this exiles. So for 3, this card featuring Elspeth can exile Heliod. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so cool card. I like it. We'll see if it sees any play outside of like budget Commander lists. I think that's really going to be where it shines. All right, next up. Expand the Sphere. This is a sorcery for 3 and a green. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. Put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. If you put fewer than 2 lands onto the battlefield this way, proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. So there is a card right now that is a standard legal card called Cartographer's Survey, which is basically this, but just strictly worse. It's just look at the top 7, or well, I think it's top 7, so this is 6, but whatever. Like, look at the top cards, take 2 lands, put them on the battlefield. Whee! And that's all you get. The fact that this has the upside of proliferating is amazing. Because if you're in a deck that has access to counters, like, so you have plus counters, you got poison counters, you've got planeswalkers, this thing gets out of hand really, really, really fast. This isn't like itself getting out of hand, but it's just such a good utility piece. Because in the early game, if you hit this on for 4 mana, you can ramp from 4 to effectively 7 mana. So if you're trying to get to a point where you can play, you know, our Plague Dinosaur friend, and you want to ramp, Expand the Sphere can get you there. Now, it's 4 mana ramp. That's asking a lot. And we're in a format where the mana dorks are pretty lacking. So, like, yeah, if you get a land or a Loam Speaker to actually survive for a turn, you could Loam Speak into this. And that's nice, but, like, you can't count on it. In any event, though, if you've got counters going on stuff, the proliferation mode is huge. So in the early game, you can get 2 lands. In the late game, if you already have plenty of lands, and you're not necessarily looking for like a particular non-basic that like combos in a particular way. You're just ripping this to try to proliferate twice. You can cast it for 4, and even if you see the lands, it says put up to 2. That means that you have the agency to choose 0. You could choose to put 0 lands onto the battlefield, and you would proliferate twice. That could be genuinely game breaking if your opponent has a poison counter situation going on, or you're rocking like the new Vraska who has proliferate on a 0. You know, if any poison counters are on the field, this is a ramp spell that could be a kill shot in some decks. I think that's nuts. Like, I think that's actively nuts, and I think people are like sleeping on this. I don't think anybody's talking about it, but I do believe there will be some poison counter decks that do run this, and I think it's going to be awesome. I could eat my words on that, but if I had to pick a card that people are sleeping on right now, like one of my sleepers for this set, Expand the Sphere is absolutely one of them. I think this card is like real good. All right, and then finally, the last card I want to talk about today, we have Unnatural Restoration. This is a sorcery for 1 and a green. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Proliferate. Again, we're proliferating. So I think Unnatural Restoration is, again, quietly amazing. So in the case of Expand the Sphere, we had Cartographer's Survey with this like supercharged proliferate package built into it. With Unnatural Restoration, we have regrowth, kind of. Like, we have a regrowth with proliferate just stapled onto it for extra value. That rules. Now, in the case of regrowth, you can grab any card, so you can grab instants and sorceries. Like, theoretically, you could use regrowth to grab regrowth, which would be dirtily, but maybe relevant if you're trying to get your storm count up or something. But anyway, in this case, you can only grab permanent cards, so you are limited to, well, lands, creatures, artifacts, and enchantments, and maybe battles, who knows, we'll see. Yeah, this card is basically regrowth plus proliferate. That's amazing. I think that's genuinely fantastic. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see if it's good enough. If a situation arises where we're doing like sacrifice stuff, then obviously it's great because we want to be able to recur out of our graveyard. But we're also doing a lot of mill, and green has some phenomenal ways to apply poison counters, a lot of which are creatures. And also, one of the things that I find myself being frustrated about while trying to play green-based decks in Standard right now is just the sheer amount of removal. And I'm like, man, I wish I had better ways in green to protect my stuff. Well, the other option is to recur your stuff. So if it goes to the graveyard, just pull it back. You know, yeah, your creatures are dying, but now for 2, you can just pull it back with a proliferate, which maybe is going to buff a walker you have lying around. Or a saga that you have chilling around. Because that would bump up to chapter 2 of the saga. I'm just realizing my favorite reanimation spell is Cruelty of Gix, and we're walking into a proliferate meta. Oh, strap in, everybody. This is going to get nasty. I can't wait. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out this video. I appreciate it immensely. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and we will definitely be taking a look at more spoilers as things unfold, because I think this set looks awesome. So, I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day, everybody.